And I am live. Good evening. It's Gordon Causey, Gordy Canuck, and you are watching Act One, a Canadian take on news events late in the evening, Monday, September the 9th, 2025. And there is a lot going on in the news. This is what I do for the most part on my channel, a Canadian take on news events, whether they be Canadian news events or of the international variety. And tonight is going to be primarily international. We'll see who, if anyone, comes on and wants to fill up the live chat. Quite of late, it's been quite engaging. My most recent video got a lot of chatter. We're talking about this Christian doctrine of the rapture. And just to put a fine point on it, it's not a universal doctrine of professing Christians. Some Christians believe in this doctrine of the rapture, this idea that we're heading towards a period called the tribulation. How far away it is, no one knows. But before the tribulation comes, there are a lot of Christians who believe that they will be, to use a Star Trek term, beamed up, and they will avoid this period of tumult, of tribulation. And it's an attractive doctrine, especially when you see the signs of the times, when you recognize the season that we're living in and all the turmoil, all the trouble in the world. And that's what I'm going to be talking about tonight, because in the last few days, there have been a number of significant global events that have taken place, the most recent of which, unless something has happened in the last few hours, is that Israel launched an aerial strike within the confines of the nation state of Qatar. Qatar is on the Arabian Peninsula and is also the political headquarters of Hamas. Hamas, of course, is the ruling entity in the Gaza Strip. And depending upon which news outlets you use, depending upon which news outlets you subscribe to, for lack of a better term, they may be called a terrorist organization, or simply the ruling party, the ruling governing entity of the Gaza Strip. And it goes without, it's pretty much universally accepted that they are politically, that they have something of a political arm that exists within the nation state of Qatar, the Arabian nation of Qatar. And apparently there was a specific residence in a very high-end neighborhood that was targeted. Israel, I believe, they regard the strike that they performed as having been successful and are claiming to have taken out senior Hamas political leadership. And this would certainly involve, if true, this would involve the leadership that has been involved in the negotiations. The Qataris are quite often involved in the negotiations, as are the Egyptians, about the war that's taking place between Israel and Hamas. And I apologize if my station is lagging somewhat. Uh, I'm going to do a quick shout out. Adrian, get off the internet. Pardon for that. Welcome to a raw, miserable, pathetic little YouTube station. No production value, just a lone voice in the wilderness, elbowing his way into the crowded YouTube space where there's tons of content out there. And often you have to, at least I believe, you need to be discerning, because quite often internet providers, and especially the big ones, YouTube channels, I should say, a lot of these YouTube channels, you should be at least cautious, because they may be beholden to one interest or another, and that interest may be financial. Uh, and I'll get more into that later. I can assure you that I have no one's behind the scenes pulling my strings. These are the genuine thoughts, views, and opinions of a 59-year-old Canadian man, former Canadian military from the communication branch, For those who know the military, signal sig would be my métier, my trade, as it were. And I left the military in 2021. Now I'm currently working in a simple retail environment. I live in southern southeastern Ontario. I'm about 150 kilometers or 100 or so miles east of the GTA. I often reference the picture off my shoulder there that shows the CN Tower as it would have looked, the looking along King Street in Toronto back probably circa 1978, 1979, somewhere around that area. At any rate, what this is going to mean, this strike against Hamas, it leads to the question of A, was Israel successful in its aim to uh, take out senior Hamas political leadership? Yes or no? I believe they are presenting it as a successful strike. Uh, and if that is the case, if Hamas has been somewhat decapitated, for lack of a better term, if their senior leadership is wiped out, what does that mean for the prospect for peace negotiations? How can you have negotiations when if the principal negotiators for Hamas have been eliminated? That's one issue. Uh, and we know that within the Gaza Strip itself, most of Hamas senior leadership has equally been eliminated. So it's that old adage of cutting off the head of the snake. Israel regards Hamas as an evil snake, and you don't cut off the tail, you cut off the head. And the political head of Hamas is headquartered in Qatar, and it's very possible that they have either been completely eliminated or severely damaged. We'll have to find out. I'm sure there will be news coming out. It may be out already. Uh, and how this what is the reaction going to be in the Arab and broader Islamic world? Is it going? There's been a lot of, oh, I don't know how to put it. There has been a lot of hatred of Jews and all things Jewish has been on the rise. I'm not a big fan of this term anti-Semitic. It's a bit of a problematic label that has been stuck on Jew hatred uh, because Semitic refers to a language group, and Hebrew is a Semitic language, but then Arabic is a Semitic language. um, Aramaic, the language that Jesus is widely believed to have spoken. That was the language of ancient Israel, biblical Israel. It started out as Hebrew, it became Aramaic, and then now it's back to being Hebrew. But at any rate, that's a digression. Um, what's going to happen in the broader Islamic world? We've seen in my native Canada, there have been numerous protests by those who support Hamas and that want Israel wiped off the map from the river to the sea. That's the rhetoric you hear. And for those unfamiliar, I've said it many times, but I'll repeat it. The river they're referencing is the Jordan River, which is the eastern boundary, if you will, of Israel. Israel starts at the Jordan River and then it goes to the Mediterranean Sea. So when you talk about wiping out it, from the river to the sea, that means all of Israel wiped off the map. They want to replace Israel, the extremist element within groups like, well, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, certainly Iran sponsors these groups or has been. Uh, they want Israel eliminated completely off the map, and they want it to be replaced by a new state that I assume they would give the name Palestine to. And for the first time in history, there would be an independent nation state called Palestine if they succeed in their goal. I do not believe they will, but that would be their goal. They would want to eliminate Israel, and for the first time in world history, create a nation state, an independent nation state, and they would give it the name Palestine, which was the name that was given to the territory that included all of Israel and all of Jordan after World War One. They called it the Mandate for Palestine, but it wasn't an independent nation state. It was ruled by Britain. And prior to British rule, it was ruled by the Turks, by the Ottoman Turks prior to World War One. And that Ottoman rule went on for about 100 or so years. Sorry, 400, something like 400 years. It was ruled by the Ottoman Turks. The history going back for more than 2,000 years of this little strip of land on the Levantine coast. For most of its history, it has been ruled by foreign colonial powers. It's been ruled by the Babylonians, by the Medo-Persians, by the Greeks, by the Romans, by the Arabians, by Europeans. It's been ruled for most of its history. And this attack, one interesting thing to note is that the United States has signaled that Israel did this on its own. We had nothing to nothing to do with it, almost inferring that they weren't even aware it was going to take place. And like many, and now there are even mainstream articles on this, and that is horse hockey. That is garbage. There is no way that the Israeli Air Force flew, I think it was somewhere around a dozen of its fighter jets into Qatari airspace without the Qatari Air Force being aware of it, or likewise without the Americans being aware of it, because they also have military assets. They have bases in Qatar. I believe it's two, but they have at least one, but I think it's two bases that the Americans have in Qatar. So there is no way that Israel would not give its ally and biggest supporter, the United States of America and the Trump administration, there's no way they would not give them a heads up. And there are even suggestions that Israel might have given the Qataris a, head, a heads up. And then you get into the situation where the government of Qatar and governments across the Arab world, they have to play a bit of a game that exists in any country. It happens in Canada, it happens in the United States, happens in Europe, happens in all over the world. You have a reaction for Joe Schmo on the street. And then there's another reaction behind closed doors. So while Qatar and other voices in the Arab world have likened Israel to a mafia-style state and moving in, and they said that this is like mafia-style diplomacy, for lack of a better word. It's certainly not diplomatic to go and bomb people, but they're saying this is mafia style. This is not accepted international diplomatic norms. That's the argument. However, that I believe could simply be rhetoric, displaying your anger and distaste for what Israel did. But I think it's very possible that Qatar knew that Israel was coming, that they were going to do this. And I take it as a given that the Americans certainly knew about it ahead of time. And it may be the case, we'll never know. It may be the case that the Trump administration uh, tried to dissuade Netanyahu and the Israelis, or they may have said, hey, fill your boots, do what you want. We'll never know. So that's one thing in the world that is shaking the foundations of our world. It's already shaking with, Yemen, Gaza. There have been terrorist-style attacks reported in Jerusalem against Israeli citizens in Tel Aviv. So that region of the world is already shaking. We have the unfolding situation in Sudan, to stick to the Middle East, with its massive civil war, claims of genocide. The UN says it is the world's worst humanitarian disaster right now, Sudan. But in the minds of most Canadians, Americans, Westerners, certainly Canadians, I mean, CBC News barely touches or doesn't even cover at all a lot of nights what's going on in Sudan. So it's Sudan. So it might as well not exist at all. And I do see I have some people watching. I do appreciate the thumbs up. So, if you want to fill up the live chat, who's ever watching, let me know who you are, your nickname that shows up automatically, but also let me know where you're chiming in from. I'm always curious to know. I love seeing I've got people from all over Canada, from coast to coast. I've got a few Montrealers, some on the West Coast, some in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Americans and people from Europe, and a guy recently chimed in from Australia. So let me know where you're from. And I also understand that that helps boost the algorithms. And I know that my station is lagging a bit right now. This is when I speak to the fact that I'm, low budget, no budget, simple laptop, built-in camera and microphone, very bare bones basic. Raw station. I often say miserable and pathetic, but there's no one pulling my strings. But if you're suspicious that I might be a, a paid player, there's nothing wrong with thinking that, because anyone who is a paid player is not going to tell you that anyway. They're going to try and convince you of to hold a particular point of view, whatever point of view they're pushing. And interestingly, and this thought has occurred to me, I've expressed it before, that in the Middle East, that Israel is something of the Don Corleone family. If you're familiar with the old Godfather saga, Godfather One, Godfather Two. Uh, However, that doesn't mean the other players are innocent. That Iran and Qatar and Syria, Bashir al-Assad, that these other, and the Houthis, that these other regimes are, you know, clean in any sense of the word. Far from it. What you have is, when you get into politics of this strata, and so you talk about the pot calling the kettle black in referring to Israel as being somewhat of a mafia type organization. Well, that's the way I tend to view the entire Middle East and to some degree the entire world. But at the same time, I think it's worst in the Middle East and Israel because they're the number, they are not the number one economy in the Middle East, but they punch way above their weight for a country without oil or any significant natural resources. They've become a tech giant. They're something of a fruit basket for Europe. Not massive because of their tiny size, but again, they punch way above their weight. And I look upon the Arab world, they want to take down Israel, the Corleone family. But would that bring peace to the region? Absolutely not. Look at what's happening in Sudan. Look at what happened in Syria. Look at what has happened over the last 10 years in Yemen. We've had hundreds of thousands of Arabs in those countries, and Sudan isn't an Arab nation per se. It's not on the Arabian Peninsula, but then again, neither is Syria. It's a bit of a misnomer to call it Arabian. However, when the Arabians were huge, massive colonizers like Europeans. Europeans spread all throughout the world. I'm of European descent, so you could say that Canada is something of a European country in a fashion. Well, much of the Middle East is Arab in orientation for that same reason, because Arabs colonized like crazy. They colonized North Africa. They colonized right up into the Iberian Peninsula. You can read up on that history if you like. And they colonized, into Asia as well. So I'm getting no engagement. I always appreciate chat, and there's nothing coming up, but we're going to move on. So we've got the world shaking in, oh, whale oil beef is here, and he's flying at 2 times speed. So he came on late, and he's playing at double speed, which is something, there's that little wheel cog settings icon at the bottom of the screen. You can hit that, you can change the speed. I say that because a year or so ago, within the last year or so, I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know. And I've used it many times myself since, whether I'm watching a live stream or otherwise, just to a lot more content you can take in. So where are we? So France is the next unsettled area. And what had happened in the nation of France is that the government was defeated. A guy by the name of, I had to write down his name, Francois Bayrou or Bayrou. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his name. Doesn't strike me as a particular Francois is a very French name, but Bayrou, is it Bayrou? You know, in French, the Y is can give me difficulty, même comme quelqu'un qui parle français comme une langue seconde. I speak French as a second language, but I'm not exactly sure how you would say François. I would tend to say Bayrou because I know the name Roy in French is pronounced Roy, and so Bayrou is probably the way it's pronounced, but I'm not sure. Uh, at any rate, he was, past tense of the verb, the prime minister of France. And France's political system is something of a hybrid between the United States Republican style democracy and the Westminster style of democracy that Canada has, parliamentary style. So we have Emmanuel Macron, who is the president of France. However, there is also a prime minister, and they have what is referred to as their National Assembly, Assemblée Nationale. And the prime minister, meaning the leader of the National Assembly, is actually an appointment appointed by the president. However, that prime minister then has to form something of a governing coalition and in order to rule. And this Francois Bayrou, that's the way I'm going to say it, put forth a budget, a budgetary measure, and it was something of an austerity bill because France is a mess. They spend way more than they bring in taxation. The French citizenry has massively high expectations regarding social services, number of weeks of vacation, government largesse. They expect the government to spend a lot of money, but the government doesn't bring enough in to fund all the programs and services that the French citizens expect. And so um, Francois Bayrou, his governing coalition, he put forward this bill and it was defeated. It's something like a vote of no confidence, which is the way it works in our Canadian Westminster parliamentary system. However, in the Canadian system, what would typically happen at that point, almost every time, pretty much every time, is that the Governor General would dissolve our Parliament, our House of Commons in Canada, and we would go to an election. However, in France, the president can then turn around and he can choose a new prime minister. And that is what has happened. And Macron has picked Sébastien Lecornu. Sébastien Lecornu. Sébastien Lecornu is the new prime minister of France. And so he will have to try and put together a budget, try and put together a plan to how are they going to steer through this? Or are they just going to continue status quo, borrow, spend, borrow, spend, borrow, spend? There's talk that the French economy and the government of France is in such financial distress that they could need a bailout by the International Monetary Fund, that they're so far behind the eight ball. And so what's going to happen? And it's interesting to note that Francois Bayrou, his government, the one that was defeated over he was going to increase taxes and he was going to cut services, and the left ganged up on him because the left is all about the unions have an enormous amount of control in France. So the union side, the left wing, was very much opposed to austerity measures. The rhetoric that the left employs is that you're hitting the average, Joe citizen, but you're not going after the wealthy. Just go after the wealthy. Leave us alone. And the right jumped on it because this, I forget her first name, Le Pen, daughter, I believe the daughter of Francois Le Pen, who started a right wing party. They are opposed to Francois Bayrou because they want to curtail wide open immigration. And we're going to talk more about this because this is something that's happening throughout Europe. It's happening in Britain, it's happening in Germany. There's a lot of anti-immigration sentiment. There's this notion that the level of immigration in countries like France, Germany, Britain, that it needs to be severely curtailed. I'm certain some people who gravitate toward Alternative for Germany, to um, Le Pen's party in France. If someone wants to tell me the name of Le Pen's party, I forget the name. It's there, but I can't recall it. I love having two languages in my head sometimes. And then, of course, you have Nigel Farage, leader of the Reform Party in Britain. Likewise, I'm certain that they have some followers who want to see immigration completely halted. Uh, and this world is destabilizing to a great degree. Um, there is uh, a rise of nationalism, which is something that was seen in the lead up to World War One. If you look back at the history of before what was at the time called the Great War, when that First World War broke out, they didn't call it World War One because they didn't know there was going to be another one 20 odd years later. So they just called it the Great War, or at times it was called the War to End All Wars. Another sobriquet I've heard affixed to it is the War for Civilization. Uh, so prior to World War One, nationalism was on the rise. British nationalism, German nationalism, Russian nationalism. Nationalism was rising, and it's the same thing has happened now, but the dynamics are different now because within the Western world, there is a divide, a massive divide, and it's primarily urban versus rural. The cities have large populations of recent immigrants, and quite often the recent immigrants are members of the Islamic faith. And the Islamic faith has different traditions, different cultural values than those who are, even if you're secular, even if you're not a professing Christian, our culture, our society, our values are based on Judeo-Christian ethic, which has some commonality with Islam, but there are massive differences. And so we're sitting on a powder keg. We are sitting on a powder keg. In France, people are waving the le tricolore, le bleu blanc rouge, the blue, white, red. That's the flags and the colors uh, of the drapeau français, the French flag, and it's typically referred to in French as le tricolore, the three-color flag. And Canadians will remember that during our Ottawa trucker convoy protest, that some individuals started to associate uh, our wonderful Canadian flag, and they would be triggered if they saw a truck flying the Canadian flag. It became emblematic for those who wanted to protect Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms, our Constitution, the rights and liberties that are enshrined in our laws, and they're waving the flag. to support that, but people were so afraid of COVID, and oh my gosh, they're dancing and singing on the streets of Ottawa, and they're playing street hockey. This is terrifying, and they're flying under the Canadian flag, and people became afraid. The flag has become something of a representation in the minds of some to be something of a racist banner, like flying the Confederate flag. It's crazy the way the world is going right now. And so that kind of covers France, and touching on Germany and Britain, we have a bit of a powder keg going on, and it exists in Canada and the US as well. It's not as bad here. Danny from Montreal has shown up. Good to see you, my friend. Glad to see the chat filling up finally. Danny saying hi to Whale. Hopefully, Whale is catching up on double speed and will soon. I'll What's great when you listen to me at double speed and I'm going 100 miles an hour, it sounds like I'm a really smart guy because listen to how fast he talks. Man, that guy processes information quick. And then you finally catch up. And then I talk my normal rate of speech is not like you get at double speed. Uh, Whale is saying that he's just about there. Yeah, it takes a while to catch up. I was doing it earlier tonight. I was listening to some content by Counsel and Might, by my friend George Antonios, and I sometimes jump on his channel. He has open mics, and I sometimes chime in, but I didn't tonight. But the other thing that's going on is in Nepal, and Nepal has seen a lot of civil unrest. The government there, in a somewhat dictatorial fashion, shut down social media. And it led to, primarily, they're saying that it was primarily members of Gen Z, like 20 somethings, people in their late teens, 20s, maybe up to 30, taken to the streets. And there have been riots. There are reports of government officials being attacked, maybe even, sent to their reward. And the world is going, do you feel it? Creation is groaning, to use a biblical reference. The whole creation is groaning right now. And, getting back to the topic of my last video, talking about the rapture, is it any wonder why people are attracted to this doctrine? Because you can see the writing on the wall. And you have a rise in nationalism at a time when certainly the Islamic world has large population centers in major European countries. I once heard a comedian refer to France. He said, "Oh, yeah, France, it's my favorite Arab country in the world." It's if you go to the population centers, it is very Arab in orientation. Paris, Marseille, Lyon, the major centers. Same with England, Manchester, London, certainly. Birmingham. Eat Me is here. And okay, keep an eye on you know what? I should send you guys a notification because I know you follow me on Facebook, and anyone else who wants to follow me on Facebook or friend me up, go ahead. Gordy Canuck, GordieCanuck, Gordy Canuck. That used to be my backup profile. Now it's my main one because I lost access to my original profile, which annoys me because I had close to 5,000 friends and followers on my original Facebook profile, but I can't access it anymore. So I've had to go to my backup, and I'm coming up to 900, somewhere around there. Love to build it back up, but I'm not on Facebook as much as I was during the COVID era. And Whale Oil Beef, Eat Me is writing greetings to Eat Me is saying hello to everyone. So I have Eat Me, Nancy from Montreal. Danny is likewise from Montreal. Whale Oil Beef is from, I forget the name of the city, if it's Richmond, wherever, British Columbia. Maybe you can remind me again. I'm bad that way. Is it Richmond? Is it Kelowna? Is it Courtney? I don't know. Anyway, So yeah, we've got unrest happening everywhere in the world right now. And I wanted to get on to this theme of The Godfather. And this also idea about my station being miserable, pathetic, raw, no strings behind my back. No one's telling me what to say. These are the genuine thoughts and opinions of Gordy Canuck, Gordon Causey. New Westminster, first capital city of BC. Okay, before Victoria. I wasn't aware of that. And it's funny, Westminster, that's our style of democracy in Canada. We follow the Westminster parliamentary model. But at any so it's kind of fitting that that would have been the first capital. I wasn't aware that it was. At any rate, there's one particular segment of the Godfather saga that always I've watched it several times. You can get the clip on YouTube, and it's when Al Pacino, his character, Michael Corleone, has had a meeting is requested between Michael and between that will be attended by Michael Sollozzo, the Turk, who's good with a knife, and the Turk's bodyguard, Sergeant McCluskey of the New York City Police Department. And in this little scene, the the Don Corleone, Don Vito Corleone is incapacitated. There's been an attempt on his life. He's out of the picture somewhat. He's in bed. And so you have the leadership of the Corleone family, which is Sonny, who's now taken over as the Don, then the heads of the they're trying to decide how are they going to deal with this situation because they want to take out this guy Salazzo, but they can't because he's under close personal protection from a member of the New York City Police Department. And Tom Hagen makes the point that now to Sonny, he says, take this into consideration. While Salazzo is being protected like this, he is untouchable. No family has ever taken down a member of the police force. If you did that, Sonny, all the five families would line up against you. The old man's political protection would run for cover. And Sonny's perplexed. He doesn't know what to do. He's, what do we do about this McCluskey, about this dirty cop? And then Michael comes up with the solution. And he says, they want to have a meeting with me. We find out where the meeting is going to be. We insist that it's some place public, like a restaurant, where I know I'll be safe. And we get our informers to find out where it's going to be. And if we can plant a gun there, because I'm not going to be able to take a gun with me, they're going to check me. So we find out where it's going to be, plant a gun, then I'll kill them both. And they all start laughing. And they, like it's a ridiculous suggestion. And Sonny comes along and says, hey, nice college boy, didn't want to get involved in the family business. Now you want to go and gun down a police officer because he slapped you in the face. You're taking this very personal. This is business and you're taking it personal. And Mikey says, it's not personal. So we're talking about a dirty cop. We're talking about a cop who got involved in the rackets and got what was coming to him. Then he turns to Tom Hagen and he says, that's a pretty good story. We have newspaper men on the payroll, don't we, Tom? They might like a story like that. And if you know the movie, and most people do, it's on everyone. Every movie critic has it in their top three, if top five or top three, if not number one. Um, and it's all about getting your story out, your propaganda, truth or otherwise, to get it out, to get your side of the story pervasively spread in the media. And criminal outfits like the mafia have journalists, media, reporters who are on their payroll. And that holds for corporations, that holds for political entities, and that holds for Israel, and it equally holds for Hamas and the Palestinian Authority in Judea Samaria. It holds for Qatar. It's pervasive. It's throughout the world. And so, bring this back to my little miserable, pathetic station. I'm beholden to no one. Actually, I shouldn't say that. I'm a professing Christian. I am beholden to Christ, the He who said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And when it comes from any other source other than this book, you have to be incredibly discerning about what is the truth. What you're typically getting is one person's or one entity's view of what the truth is, which leads me to read what Nancy has written. She is of the opinion that Qatar was uncalled for. Heard the news today. Just gives more credence to the fact that Bibi, when deposited of uh, when deposited of power, going to face multiple tribunals. I think you mean when deposed, um, when deposed, when removed, when he's out of power, that he's going to face multiple tribunals, local and international, for his corruption charges. Whoever came to justice for the murder of Archduke Ferdinand, presumptive heir to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire? You'll recall that in World War One, that the straw that broke the camel's back. I would contend that World War One, everyone had their dance partners, all the alliances had been formed, the militaries had been built up. They were just waiting for an excuse to start the war. And they got their excuse when the heir apparent, the supposed heir to the Austrian-Hungarian Empire by the name of Archduke Ferdinand and his wife Sophia, when they were murdered, assassinated in Sarajevo, what would later become Yugoslavia, what is now a hodgepodge of different countries after that Yugoslavian war. You got Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, all these. But who was convicted, who was tried, who was fingered as having been the murderer of Archduke Ferdinand? What were that war was a chance to it was another little name put on that war, is the end of empire. Prior to World War One, the world was divided up into empires. You had the French, what remained of the French Empire. You had the British Empire, which was at its zenith, at its peak. The sun never sets on the British Empire. They had holdings all over the world. You had an emerging American empire. You had the Germans had their empire. The Russians had their empire. The Ottomans had their empire. And so World War One has at times been called the end of empire. It reshaped the world order. And I think we're moving in that direction now. But my faith informs me that things now in our technological and the armaments available now, we're living now in the nuclear age. I'm here to say that before a new order can be established, the order that the powers of this world want to establish, before that can happen, before that does happen, that the king, the name above all names, the name to which every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, he, the king, is coming back and will establish his reign on this earth. Um, so and Eat Me is equating Zelensky in Ukraine with Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu. He's often called Bibi, even he himself. It's not a derogatory. It's it's a nickname, like we call George W. Bush W. Uh, it's not like calling we used to call Trudeau sock boy. That was derogatory. Bibi is not. And Nancy is saying that Bibi is like Zelensky, using war as a pretext to maintain his grip on power. And I'm not going to dispute that. I'm not going to dispute that one iota. Um, Benjamin Netanyahu, prior to October 7th, 2023, when the kind of the spark that led to everything that's going on, prior to that event, Benjamin Netanyahu was facing the prospect of being prosecuted on charges of corruption. However, since the war broke out between Hamas and Israel, that prosecution, the taking him to court for on charges of corruption, well, we can't do it. We're in a state of emergency. We're at war. And you know, October 8th, the very day after that, Hezbollah started to fire rockets from Lebanon into northern Israel, forcing, I think it's 70, 80,000 Israelis had to flee northern Israel, go down to primarily, I understand, Tel Aviv, and businesses, schools, you know, people were living out of hotels because you can't live somewhere, you can't go to school, you can't work in an area where when there's rockets raining down on you. Uh, at any rate, Eatme has asked me to go and search the Haaretz or the Jerusalem Post about the charges. Yes, no, I've read about them. Gifts that he received, influence peddling. It's been a while since I read it. I read plenty of it immediately in the wake of the October 7th attack, and I think there are merit to those charges. It would have to go to court, but yeah, and I'm not a lawyer, and my knowledge of the Canadian legal system isn't that extensive, so my knowledge of the Israeli judicial system is even worse. But at any rate, um, Whale Oil is saying, why don't we see Israelis pushing back on their leadership? Is that news suppressed, or do they love Bibi as much as it seems to allude? Uh, Israel is like the United States, is like Canada. It's a democracy, and there are opposing views. There are Israelis who do like Benjamin Netanyahu. They tend Benjamin Netanyahu, on the economic side, is something of he's economically he's a conservative, and then you have Israel has a very vibrant and strong left wing tradition as well. They've had a number. Itzhak Rabin, I think that's his name, was a left leaning prime minister of Israel. He was, I believe it's Itzhak Rabin, who was taken out after he signaled that he was willing to work toward this idea of the so-called two-state solution. Personally, I don't think a two-state solution in Israel, I've said it many times, it's not viable because the people of the West Bank, the people of Judea, Samaria, who live on the western bank of the Jordan River, and the people of Gaza, they don't want a state, they want everything. The Arab League, when Israel was being formed back, 19 in the years leading up to their independence, they could have had a two-state solution back then, but they didn't want one. They wanted everything. And in the war that ensued, Jordan took part, Egypt took part, and the Jewish Palestinians took the rest. So it's, this is the creation is groaning. It's groaning in the Middle East. Certainly, look at Sudan. According to uh, the UN, I mean, who hates Israel, there are more resolutions against Israel than all the other nations of the world combined. The UN is constantly hammering at Israel. But even according to them, Sudan is the world's worst humanitarian crisis with a genocide, which the International Court of Justice was asked to rule on. the government of Sudan, um, went to the International Court of Justice because they say that the United Arab Emirates is funding a military group called the RTF, Response Task Force, or something like that. There's been something in Sudan. There was something of a civil war within the military itself. The military basically split in two, and you had one element of the military remained loyal to the government, and then you had one element that wanted to overthrow the government. And I believe the acronym to the rebel army group is called the RTF, and they've apparently reportedly received financing, funding from the United Arab Emirates. And so the Sudanese government went to the International Court of Justice and said, they're conducting a genocide. And can you rule on this? And the International Court of Justice amazingly said, it's not our jurisdiction. We're not getting involved. It's not our bailiwick. It's not our purview. Not saying we're not saying it's not a genocide. We're just saying that we don't have jurisdiction to make a ruling on it. Would they have said the same thing if accusations were leveled against Israel? I highly doubt it. But Israel has always operated under something of a double standard. What's good for the Arab world can expel Jews. Oh, no problem. But if Israel was to try and expel non-Jewish Israelis, what's good for the goose is not good for the gander in the Middle East. But Israel, should be noted, it does have a Western-style democracy. And you look at countries like Jordan. Jordan is not a it's a kingdom. It's an emirate state. Israel does, they have their Knesset, a parliament. Anyway, so getting back to Whale Oil's comment, why aren't Israelis pushing back? Some are. A significant number are. It's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 50-50. It's somewhat polarizing. And then Eat Me Nancy is saying to Whale Oil, see the Israeli protests against Bibi. Yes, and they are out there. Or go to the source with Jewish media. They tell a lot more than Western media. I listen to Haaretz. I read the Jerusalem Post. Times of Israel is another one. But I also, I was reading some Al Jazeera articles as well. I want to get the perspective of all groups. And Al Jazeera is something of the CNN of the Arab world, the Islamic world. And yes, they are taking to the streets, but not everyone. See, people who support what is happening don't go out and protest. So you see 100,000 people in the streets of Tel Aviv. Yeah, but Tel Aviv is like 1 million plus people. So how many, now, does that mean that everyone who's upset is going to go out on the street? Of course not. But people who support it obviously are not. And not everyone wants to be in a counter protest, because this is when things get violent. It's mobs are scary. Nancy is saying that Israel was hit bad by Iran. Their dome is a myth. Yeah, well, they didn't. I remember when the war first broke out, I was paying attention to some commentary, and I came across a YouTube channel that their content struck me as reasonable, and I heard the same opinions being expressed from different sources. And the view was, as Hezbollah they equated it to a chess game, with Iran being the chess player, and their pieces. Hamas was basically a pawn. Hamas, not a lot of capability. The Houthis were equated somewhat to a rook, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, with their massive hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles and drones, they were equated to being the queen. And there was talk that they could inundate Israeli airspace, overwhelm air defense systems like David's Sling and the Iron Dome, that they could overwhelm it and take out key infrastructure that would uh, water supply, electrical supply. And at one point, the head of the Israeli Electrical Authority would be like in Ontario, where I live. The biggest hydro company is called Hydro One. So it's the same type. It's like the head of Hydro One for Israel. Their top guy in the electrical infrastructure. He came out and he said that if the electrical infrastructure was taken out in Israel, that we'd be a week or 2 weeks away from disaster because water, a lot of the water that Israelis drink is from the Mediterranean and it goes through desalination plants. And so if you wipe out, like we're talking about, no water, no electricity, things would be horrible. And it struck me at the time, well, subsequent to that, I had to wonder if it goes back to Sun Tzu and the art of war. When you are strong, you want to appear weak. When you're strong, you want to appear weak. And it struck me, was that a signal to Iran to come on, bring it? Come on, we're ready for you. Looking weak in order to provoke an attack. When you look at what happened during the 1967 war, sometimes called the 6-Day War. And remember, before the 6-Day War, Jordan controlled the western bank of the Jordan River. That was Jordanian territory. And Egypt controlled the Gaza Strip. It was their territory. And then Nasser in Egypt kicked out all the UN peacekeepers from the border area on the Sinai Peninsula, the border between Egypt and Israel. Nasser kicked the UN peacekeepers out, started to mount armaments, tanks, etc., on Israel's border, and then cut off Israeli shipping, trying to cripple a 20-year-old country. And Israel had warned Nasser that if you blockade our shipping, that is a declaration of war. And did Nasser think they were bluffing? But prior to that happening, there were a lot of media reports in Israel prior to the 6-Day War that were signaling to the world and to Israeli citizens even that that we're weak, that we don't have a big enough army, that our equipment is aging, we're in trouble. And that was the reporting that was going on in the lead up to the 1967 war. And so I think it's plausible, certainly, that Nasser looked at the reporting and said, look, even their own media is talking about how weak they are. Blockade their shipping. They're not going to attack us. They're too weak. They even admit it themselves. And he blockaded their shipping, and immediately Israel launched a surprise attack, decimated the Egyptian Air Force, had air superiority in the entire region because Jordan and Syria, they quickly got involved. Jordan was allied, and Syria, both Jordan and Syria, had an alliance agreement with Egypt. So when Egypt and Israel went to war, Syria and Jordan joined in on the side of the Egyptians. And a 6-day war ensued. And when the dust had settled, the Egyptians had lost Gaza and the entire Sinai Peninsula to Israel. Jordan lost the western bank of the Jordan River. That had been their part. That had been their territory. The people living in there had been Palestinians up until 1921, when Britain gave that to Jordan. And Syria lost the Golan Heights. It was a Nakba. It was another humiliating defeat for the Arab world, to lose to this little tiny sliver of a country that had been saying, oh, we're so weak. But I think the Israelis back in 1967, and I think quite possibly recently with Iran. They were signaling the same thing. Oh, we're so weak. Please don't, we're going to be in big trouble if they attack us. They were art of war. When you're strong, appear weak. Um, and yeah, they got hit by Iran, but there was a guy named Ritter. I think his name is Ritter. He's a former U.S. Pentagon official, and he was, "Oh, Israel's history. They're going to get wiped out. They'll be gone in a month." Video after video. Now there have been suggestions that this Ritter individual, that he is basically on puppet strings controlled by the Russians. Anyway, um, and it must be noted that Iran, of course, is an ally of Russia. Everyone's, vying for, they want control of this region. The Chinese do, the Russians do, the Americans do. Everyone's got their dance partners. Again, this is almost like a rinse and repeat of the lead up to World War One. And I've said it many times that I have something of an immediacy bias. I kind of see the writing on the wall, but I'm like, but things are unfolding very slowly, but they are unfolding. Um, Nancy is saying that her little conspiratorial mind is telling her that Bibi is using the US and so they can deplete their weapons while making side deals with China and India. Anything's possible. You and we don't know what's happening behind the curtains. And the media is just there to lead us around by the nose. And you have to be incredibly discerning and recognize that if it's coming from our side, it can very well be misinformation, disinformation. And likewise, you have to recognize it from the other side as well. All sides engage in propaganda, misinformation, disinformation to try and sway public opinion. What's Nancy's asking? I bet that families of forced soldiers won't go manifest for fear of reprisal. I don't know what you mean by won't go manifest for fear of reprisal. There have been reports that members of the Israeli reserve forces are refusing to report for this latest, what's the Netanyahu is planning, Israeli forces are planning a ground invasion of Gaza. They're taking it. And that's the story. And there is reporting that a number, I don't know how pervasive it is, but that there are a number of reservists refusing to participate, refusing to be called up. They're getting called up and they're refusing to go. I imagine that Israeli military justice is probably lockstep with Canadian. And if it's deemed to be a lawful order, there can be severe repercussions on service members, whether reservist or regular force, for refusing a lawful order. Uh, and it's a bit of a different situation in Israel because in Israel, military service for both men and women is compulsory. I believe that men uh, starting at 18. I don't know the finer point details. A guy I served with in the Canadian Armed Forces was Jewish and had been in the IDF. And then he emigrated to Canada and he joined the Canadian Armed Forces. But at any rate, it's mandatory. And men, I think, have to serve a 3-year term. And I think for women, it's 18 months. So at any rate, uh, and then whale oil is pulling out that Latin term, casus belli, cause for war, declaration of war. We're waiting for the prominent casus belli event, I suppose. So it strikes me that Israel is almost inviting that. It's similar to this 1967 war where I said Nasser threatened to cut off Israeli shipping. And Israel said, if you do that, That is a casus belli. That is a cause for war. You're declaring war on us. It strikes me that Israel has been kind of inviting that same response for the past couple of years with Yemen by going in. Now with Qatar, with this most recent event, the bombing of a residential, very high end. You got to be like a multimillionaire, billionaire to live in the area they struck because Qatar, or rather Hamas's senior political leadership, well, they got international aid organizations and fundraising, for the Palestinian cause. It's like giving money to Joel Osteen's church or Kenneth Copeland's church. You think it's going to help the people of Gaza? No, it's going to buy, it's going to dig the tunnels, it's going to buy drones and missiles and rockets. It's going to, so that the senior political leadership can live in, you know, like Donald Trump, sitting on golden toilets in Qatar, safe and secure, while the poor citizens of Gaza, who are, they're double victims. They're victims of their own leadership, and because of their leadership, now they're victims of Israeli aggression against that leadership. I'm here to say Hamas does not give a rat's rosy rear end about the people of Gaza, except as means for propaganda. Hey, great, they killed another 5 kids when they tried to take out our command post. Thank goodness we put it in a school. Now we can say Israel, Gaza health authorities say Israel drone attack kills 5 children, and we can get the bleeding hearts in Canada and the United States to, oh, those horrible Israelis, release some pictures. Half of them could be staged. We don't know. And this is the thing. The first casualty of war is truth. And people see these images, see these videos, they get emotionally engaged with them the same way when they saw that field hospital being set up for COVID patients in Central Park, New York. And people and the images coming out of Italy scared the crap out of them. They get emotionally engaged by this propaganda, and propaganda can have a basis in truth. And Israel does it too. Israel engages in propaganda too. They weaponize the death of the women who were their job was to keep an eye on the border fence, what Israelis call the border fence. Give me 2 seconds. I got to do something. Sorry about that. I want to get some water. Coffee is a diuretic, and I haven't yet got Danny's suggestion. He's asked me or told me to get honey, but I want raw honey. I don't want processed honey. Uh, anyway, so let me catch up and then we'll wrap it up for tonight. Uh, Nancy's writing, so okay, can we have a frank and honest conversation of who funds Hamas? All Islamic terror groups are funded by either the US, France, United Kingdom, and Israel. And this is a question of how does the funding come? Because a lot of the funding that Hamas gets does come from Islamic based aid organizations. They go into their mosques, into the Islamic community centers, and donate the same way that synagogues across the United States, going back forever, going back to before Israel's creation, the Zionist enterprise encouraged Jewish individuals and those sympathetic to Jewish individuals to donate to the Zionist cause. And likewise, that happens in the Islamic world as well. And the money gets funneled in from all over the world, billions of dollars. And then there are non-government agencies, NGOs, and actual government agencies pouring in money in aid. A lot of the aid is called capped aid. Um, Canada will often you'll hear that we're donating 10 million here, 100 million there, but quite often what the Canadian government does is it goes and it buys Canadian goods and sends them over, but rather than listing all the goods they're sending over, they just put the dollar value on it. And that's referred to typically as capped aid. Not giving the money directly, and it actually helps subsidize Canadian enterprises, Canadian business, Canadian industry. Anyway, uh, Nancy saying about the Six-Day War that she believes it was engineered by the U.S. to make sure they could secure their own black gold silk roads. Black gold typically refers to it's a reference typically to oil. Oil is often called black gold, and Egypt doesn't have anything in the way of oil reserves, and neither does Israel. About the only resource in the region of any size, from what I understand, and it's only recently been discovered, is natural gas deposits in the Mediterranean off the coast of Gaza. And, we look at all the wars that have happened over the years. How often is our resources at least part of the equation? I never think my tendency is to think that when a war happens, uh, that there are typically more than there's a convergence of interests. There's the financial interest. That's one reason. But then there's geopolitical influence, power, injecting your power into a region. That's another element to it. Financial, certainly. I look at a war like the Persian Gulf War when Saddam Hussein was taken out. And did the United States want to control the oil fields in Iraq? Yeah, obviously, one element. Number two element, economic. Saddam Hussein was starting up an oil bourse, BOURSC, an exchange, and it was not going to transact oil deals in US dollars. It was going to use euros and rubles, and that would have been horrible for the US dollar. And so there's another reason. And another reason is the US has a lot of they have military bases now throughout Iraq. And so now we can so there's a convergence of reasons why. I never think it's just one. But anyway, um, Scott Ritter was the name of the guy I was referencing earlier, who was saying, "Oh, Iran's, oh, Israel's toast. They're gone. They've lost. This war is already over. Iran's gonna, wipe them out." My Russian friends told me to tell you that their ally Iran is, poised to wipe Israel off the map. And this is why I listen to him. I listen to him. I don't think the thing is, you gotta, it's like, the wheat and the chaff. You gotta sift through and decide what's good, what's bad. I don't think everything Scott Ritter said was wrong, but his ultimate message, I think, was propagandistic for his Russian masters. Um, And Eaton is saying, too bad that I'm not on StreamYard. Yeah, then we could go live with each other and talk back and forth. What she meant instead was protest. Manifester in French is to protest. I got to remember that. That, your first language, and c'est la langue française, because I know that manifester is to protest. And that's, but the problem is you speak English darn near perfectly. But I get it. Anyway, sorry about that. Uh, and Eatme is saying she has a lot to say tonight. You know what? We'll bookmark this and do it tomorrow. and I will do it on StreamYard. And Nancy, you can come on. I would love that because even though we often disagree, I love the fact that we can talk. That's a big problem in this world. And I'm 100% convinced you're not an individual who has puppet strings pulling you either, that your opinions are genuine. I may disagree with you, but I don't think you're being controlled in any way, shape, or form. Uh, Whale Oil is saying something different. And Nancy has to head out. No problem. I do too soon. I am working tomorrow. Um, Whale is writing that water should be delivered in a copper flask. I get it. It would be too expensive. Not sure what that is in reference to, but and Nancy is saying in defense of Scott Ritter, if the U.S. didn't get involved, his prediction might have been right. Who knows? Who knows? The Iranians have Russia as an ally. Israel has the United States. And it's almost like you have these proxy wars. The Iran-Iraq war was exactly that. Saddam Hussein used to be a strong ally of the United States, and Iran and Iraq had a 7, 8 year long war, and Iran was backed by the Russians, the old Soviet Union, and the United States backed Iraq. And it was a way for the Soviets and the Americans to fight each other, but not directly. They did it through proxies. But I'm going to end off here. We'll see where things go. I'm sure there's going to be more to talk about in the days ahead. I think there is an acceleration happening. I think we're, on the domestic front, certainly in Europe, in France, in Germany, in Britain, there's a lot of simmering unrest, and I think you're going to see it start to boil over in the major urban centers in those countries, in Germany, in France, in England. You're going to see a lot of civil unrest. They're flying the St. George flag that's the flag of the Red Cross in England a lot, along with the Union Jack. In France, now it's le tricolore, the three color, the bleu, blanc, rouge. And Germany with the 7 deaths of one party, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany party, labeled by our mainstream media and typically by government mouthpiece outlets and government officials. Oh, they're extreme alt-right because they're opposed to immigration. And there's more. I mean, Nigel Farage, leader of UK Reform and apparently surging in the polls in the UK, was addressing a US congressional panel that was talking about the clampdown on free speech in Great Britain, wherein it's being suggested that the words, let's take our country back. If someone says, let's take our country back, that's hate speech. What? Let's take our country back. That's hate speech. And scary world that we're living in. I have to wonder at some point on my station, I don't think I'm an extremist by any way, shape, or form, but I am open to listening to all sides. And I am willing to look, go down some roads where people might otherwise say, you shouldn't really talk about that. It's too sensitive. It's too controversial. I'm wondering if I profess my Christian faith. I talk out about this transgender ideology all the time, but at some point it's something that's hurtful to me. And am I going to get a knock on the door, which is something that is happening in Britain? If someone posts something online, if someone puts out content that offends people, we are in trouble. And Whale wants to go and watch the news, no problem. Anyway, I'll wish you all a very good night. And Nancy, if you can do it, message me on Facebook. We'll try and set up a time, and you can start. We can go right at it right off the bat. And maybe we should do one night en français. You'll be better than me, but I can get by and talk about what's happening in France, even though you're not in France, you're in Quebec. And Eat Me finally writes, all those deals began in World War I World War II solidified the acquisition of the Middle East, their resources. Alliances were made between said countries. Iran, aka Persia, have nothing to do with Muslims. Okay. Uh, and Wales says he only watches his own local news. Just find out what's happening. Doesn't want to. Anyway, God bless. We'll talk to you soon. And I'll end it off the way I often do. May the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord God, creator of all things, may he make his face to shine upon you, and may he grant you peace, even in this crazy world. And I'm here to say it's going to get crazier. We're going to see more trouble. And if you made it all the way to the end and you've watched an hour and 20 of me prattling on and you enjoyed it, hit the like button. I would appreciate it if you would do that. And of course, you're welcome to subscribe. So that's the end. Before I lose my voice, we'll talk to y'all later. Thanks, guys. Good night.